right, there we go. Hey guys, welcome back to the Console Explosion podcast. I'm the Philosopher. Today we've got more EA updates. We talked about it before. Uh, if you don't know, real briefly, EA put out a game, Star Wars Battlefront 2, got massive backlash for their microtransaction actions, for the way that they did their microtransactions. You know, it was very shady. There's another video. I can link you to that one. I'm not going to go over it today. But the update to that is that there's a Hawaii state legislator named Chris Lee who is pushing for some interesting things. He's trying to pass a bill of sorts to stop anti-predatory actions from a lot of these game developers. Primarily, they use Star Wars Battlefront as their example. They're saying that this game is targeted towards children. They're doing very predatory actions in order to get people to gamble. The game is structured around gambling in order to get an advantage, and there's a lot of information about that. It's very fascinating. But overall, he's just trying to stop these companies from being able to create a business model where they can exploit younger kids. I mean, Star Wars is a franchise that, you know, is loved by all, not just kids, but you can't argue that kids will be playing it. This is a very interesting thing. It's not the first time. We talked about this before, but this isn't the first time that, you know, the government or anybody has stepped in to help with the direction of gaming. I think this is a very fascinating turn. This is something that I saw happening years and years ago at GameStop. But yeah, that's where we are now. I have mixed feelings. Before I talk about that, I wanted to also say that I have a guest on here. I rambled a little bit, but I got the I can't use my words today. I'm so like already riled up. But I have the historic nerd on here. Back, he's got some personal things going on, but he stopped by just for this podcast. I'm very happy. But welcome to the show. How's it going?
Great. How you doing, man?
Doing pretty good. I'm just getting home, but you know, I wanted to talk about this. I saw this update. I had so many things going on, and now we've got this. But yeah, so I guess let me know where you are with this once you get the chance, once you get your head wrapped around this. You know, what is your initial impression of somebody trying to step in and deal with this anti-gambling is the way he's selling this legislation?
Well, you know, it's one of those things where he's only a state legislator, so it's kind of interesting to see what he's trying to do in terms of what ultimately his enforcement policy is going to be and what his overall concept's going to be for preventing these types of games from, or this type of system to be. It's such an odd thing to try and tackle, especially to go after loot crates. Because ultimately, this type of monetary and incentive for gaming has been around for a while, to where you have kids who've spent like $10,000 in FIFA and stuff like that for just cosmetic things. So it's kind of hard to say how this is gambling, because ultimately, I mean, CSGO has kind of the same thing. A lot of games kind of use the same ideas with these loot boxes that you buy and pay for that will give you these types of rewards that are kind of useless. But I'm really curious what his overall plan and strategy is to how he can kind of tightly knit this into something that can be regulated by the government.
Yeah, that's also why I stand. And I also want to clarify a little bit as the difference as to why he's singling out Star Wars Battlefront.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is normally when you see microtransactions where you get a benefit, like games like Overwatch, you can buy the loot boxes, but you don't get an advantage over your teammates. In phone games, primarily, they're free to play games, and you make money or you expedite the process by paying money. In Star Wars Battlefront, they're combining almost the worst of both worlds, where you have this loot box system where it's random. You're not paying for something like when Diablo had the auction house system, or you know, you're playing League of Legends and you're buying skins. This is you're spending real money for a chance to win an item that can give you an advantage. So the mindset that he has is that these people, you know, aren't just paying for cosmetic items that know it's going to be a cosmetic item that doesn't do anything. But this game, in their eyes, is structured around pay to win, but you're also paying $60 for this game on top of having to get ahead because of how this game is structured. So this one is very different from a lot like CS:GO. I know some people got shut down because they had a website where the same thing was happening, where you can gamble on like in-game guns
Yeah,
or
you
gun
can on
skins.
skins and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different in that sense because most of those were cosmetic.
Hmm.
As far as I know, like all the Blizzard games, like Overwatch, it's cosmetic. You get skins and trophy voices and stuff like that, sprays. But this game is characters that are stronger or better in some way. I think you can get weapons or power ups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's very fascinating, and I find myself agreeing with this Hawaii with Chris Lee, but also being very hesitant to see government step in. So I'm kind of torn. I wanted to know. Go ahead. What are you gonna say?
It's kind of one of those things where it's as soon as you bring the government into something like this, it's a dangerous first step in regards to then you have, because by the government setting this law up and establishing it, it's setting a precedent for the government to go in and regulate certain things, namely video games in this regard. So you're opening the door for the government to come in and interfere with and manipulate how these games are being made. So it's an interesting legislation that can lead to a lot more red tape potentially with game making, because this isn't the first time the government has threatened to do it. And the industry ultimately, like the ESRB that came into existence because of the government threatening to come in and regulate, the industry got together and they self-regulated themselves and built the rating system to keep the government out of it. So I think ultimately this is probably just a warning shot in terms of how the government is like, hey, this is really dumb the way you're doing this. You should probably correct this behavior before we come in and do something. So
Yeah. And to add on to that, a few people, I think there's a few articles, and then even Young, yeah, there's a video that I can link below where they talk about this actually being a scare tactic
mhm,
to stop, to basically to be a deterrent from continuing to do these actions. Like, hey, you have our attention. We'd rather not step in, but if you guys are going to be doing these things that are obviously pissing off tons of people, dropping your stocks, and so on, and kind of I don't like. So to be clear, I don't like what EA is doing. I don't
mhm.
like it. I've been a very strong person against that business model since they started. I worked at GameStop. I saw the day one DLC and the pre-order bonuses and stuff like that. And I didn't like it uh, because it incentivized people to pay more for an object that's not. They're not really getting anything more, but data that's going to be very temporary. And these people are very impulsive, and at the same time they are the ones making the choices, but also when it's kids and this is highly addictive, and gambling already is a very highly addictive thing. I don't gamble. I'm not a big fan of it, and I'm not a big fan of like kids becoming hooked on this and not really understanding the implications of what they're actually doing, and kind of growing up in this environment where online gambling is basically what they're doing. Like this guy, Chris Lee, I thought it was very interesting where he called it was like a Star Wars casino is what he called this game,
Mm.
uh, and I thought that was very fascinating. That made me think because I don't like government stepping in and messing with video games and stuff like that. I don't think they have to, but when something like this happens, and I I'm torn. I am very torn because I don't think the government needs to step in, but at the same time I don't like what EA is doing, and people will continue to pay for these things. And I think it is very predatory the way they're doing it. They have like the same ticks that slot machines have to keep people coming back for more. This is like cited by multiple sources, and if you like look up into the
Mhm.
game, you can kind of learn this about yourself or learn this about it yourself. So yeah, I'm very torn on it. I'm curious to know
Yeah.
what you think they how far can this person go with what he's doing? Like, he's trying to encourage other states to do the same thing. That's his other idea, is to encourage other states to kind of look into this, because a lot of people in politics don't really know. This guy happens to be a millennial, so it sounds like he actually knows what he's talking about. I've heard him talk. He actually is kind of a sly troll because he like says it's a trap so serious, but you can't say it's a trap and not know what
Mhm.
you're saying if you're a Star Wars fan. Like it was very smooth. But
Mhm.
yeah, back to my question is, what do you think that this guy? Well, how far do you think his reach can go?
Well, he's only a state legislator, so he can't really go that far unless he somehow gets a coalition of other states along with him, which that's a lot easier said than done. And especially the fact you're dealing with regulating a product that is openly available on the internet via Origin. So how do you go about preventing consumers from accessing that product over the internet without basically instituting censorship on individuals who are buying products? Because you don't necessarily, I mean, like you have to use Origin to get this game now, which I mean they could block Origin, but ultimately you're just going to be pissing off a lot of consumers who probably have products they bought on Origin already. For me, I think ultimately outside of that is if parents are really dumb enough to leave their credit cards attached to these Origin accounts or the Xbox or PS4 accounts and let their kids just sit there and buy crate after crate, it's completely idiotic behavior on the end of the consumer. And I think the problem is a lot of people need to realize is that by buying these games, you're facilitating this type of behavior. And so the
I
best way to
100%.
yeah, and I don't know, to me, like I looked at Battlefront 1, played the beta, and I'm like, this is gonna be just a garbage game. And
I remember
it's
you
gonna
saying
be
that.
was it?
I remember you saying that. I remember you hated the flight controls and everything like that.
I hated everything they did with the game. I'm like, this is gonna be I'm like, this game's gonna be out for like a year and a half, and they're gonna release a new game, and everyone's gonna forget about the first one, and then we'll just forget about the second one again. But thankfully,
Yeah.
this time around, they have positioned themselves and pissed off so many people it actually made an impact where EA actually had to respond, which is kind of rare for the giant that they are.
Yeah. I EA is known for putting out games that are lower quality in order to hype up their next game.
Hmm.
Like they will put out a game like Star Wars Battlefront, knowing that it's lacking things that they could have put in there, just so that they can hype up the next game that already has that has these features. Like, oh, you wanted space battles? We already knew you wanted space battles. We just didn't put it in there because we had to have something part two to come out.
Something to encourage you to get the next game.
Like, exactly. It's in my opinion, it's not a secret. I've seen it happen multiple times. I think it's a smart tactic to do, but sometimes bigger companies can get very underhanded with it and exploit their popularity and their influence over the gaming community, which really sucks because some people will buy anything that is put in front of them if they like the IP.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this instance, people finally spoke up and said no.
Well, just I don't know. To me, this might sound weird, but like I'm looking at it from the outside. I hate like I play Overwatch occasionally, and honestly, I hate the loot box system. It just irritates me. And when I find out people actually spend money on like digital skins that you can't really do anything with, it kind of boggles my mind because I really don't. It doesn't appeal to me in the same way, so I can't relate to people that find that compulsive need to own these skins or all of these things. But ultimately, the one benefit Overwatch has over like Battlefront in terms of you can if you play the game enough, you can unlock these just naturally by just getting the points associated with it. Where Overwatch, or necessarily where Battlefront appears to have completely shifted the dynamic to where you're going to have to spend thousands of hours just to unlock characters you would have already in other games. And
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just crap like that where it's in the game, and it used to be common practice to where you'd release a game that was finished, and then you might release patches to it that would correct any type of bug or error you somehow missed in production. And then you would release an expansion pack, which would be more stuff for the game. And EA used to do that all the time. On like Battlefield 1942, there were just countless expansion packs for it, which people were okay with buying because they were adding more content to the game. And that was really before you could make that kind of stuff freely distributed to encourage player population and stuff like that, like they did with I'm trying to think, was it like Titanfall and some other games where they released free content expansions for it to get people to keep playing it more? And
I think
EA
Mass Effect 3 did that as well.
was that?
Mass Effect 3 did that as well, I believe, for like maybe one of the two of the DLCs. Not all of them.
Yeah, but like there's behavior you can do that's just ultimately pro-consumer, and EA, unfortunately, just because they have that Star Wars license, was like, "Fuck you, we're EA, and this is Star Wars. You're gonna buy it whether we you're gonna buy it just because the name Star Wars is slapped on it." And I think it's just kind of it's just bad behavior, and I think people need to realize that, like, hey, if you don't buy it, they won't do it. But people keep saying like, "Oh yeah, I'm not gonna pre-order this game" and stuff like that. But no, they pre-ordered anyway, despite the fact they're probably only going to play this game collectively for a couple of weeks before they just forget about it because it's just not that compelling of an experience.
Yeah. It's a very fascinating phenomenon. I want to try to break down your first statement a little bit too in a second. But yeah, a lot of this is something that I noticed because for most of my life, I was a gamer. I played a lot of games up until the age of 25, and then I got some personal goals and started working on them. And I started to distance myself from my friends just because they played a lot of games, and I wanted to work on my body and entrepreneurial skills and stuff like that. And it was around that time that I also realized that when I did want to play games with them, they had hopped around from one game to the other so often and buying all these games and then dropping them, buying all of them and dropping them. And I realized that I had that habit of like, we would, get on the bandwagon of whatever game is hot, play it for a little bit and then drop it. And after I started learning about money management and things like that, I realized that everything that you spend money on is potentially an investment or the opposite of an investment, which I can't think of the word right now, liability. So, I was putting money towards all this liability that wasn't moving me forward. Like, you could argue that, yeah, it was fun, but if you look at your return on investment, was it $60 worth of fun? Could you have put that $60 towards something else, like a book or like classes or something? Something that would have moved me forward towards where I actually wanted to go, and not using games to suppress the disappointment in my heart about how my life was going at the time.
You got tired of it being an escapism mechanism.
Yeah, it was definitely an escapism thing. But back to the point of like you talking about how people can, buy skins and do that. I will say the one game that I've done that is League of Legends, because I support them as developers. I think they've done a lot and grown a lot, and I respect that. But games like EA are different to me. They're AAA. League of Legends is AAA now, but I've been playing it since it was in beta, since like it was a pay to play, not pay to play, but purchase to play game. And but back to your point, though, one of the key things that gets people to want to buy these skins is significance. That's one of like the core things, core feelings that people want to have is significance. And having cool skins and having things that look awesome that other people are going to compliment you on is nice. It's the same thing with like the buying of shoes or any other clothing impulse. Same exact feeling that they get. They get this boost of serotonin, not serotonin. It might be serotonin. It's like a happy chemical going on in your head. I can't think of the words right now, but yeah, that would be my argument. That these people just want to feel significant. It's very sad that that's the case, and at the same time, like on one side, it's like it's you spending that money and you're making that active choice.
Yeah. George Carlin said it best, I think, in the if you're buying things to make yourself feel happy, you might as well just tape sandwiches to yourself to kick your hunger.
All right. Yeah.
Something like that. To me, it's just I've never really. So, like, my favorite games were always ones that didn't have that high level of customization to it. It was always games that had a grand equalization in terms of, like, Call of Duty 1 to me was probably one of the pinnacles of like a tournament shooter, in the sense that everyone had the same loadout, same look, same weapons. There was no modifiers to the weapons you were using that changed the way the game was playing. So ultimately, if you beat someone using the same weapon, it was simply because you were better, not because they had access to a better perk or something along those lines in their build that made them better, that gave them a slight edge. So that's kind of like, that's where my mentality comes from, in the sense that I don't like how games have shifted in that regard. But I will give Counter-Strike some props for just doing solid cosmetic stuff. But to me, the gameplay in those particular titles it wasn't captivating enough to keep me coming back to it. But back to EA, with Battlefront, this whole thing has been just an absolutely just mind-boggling affair in terms of what they attempted to do with loot crates and the amount of money they tried to siphon off, to the point that I think they were selling the game somehow at a loss, despite the fact that they sold, like, I don't know how many copies they sold, but because they had doubled down so heavy on this monetization model with the loot boxes, the game started just losing money, which is kind of almost unheard of for EA, especially for a Star Wars title. But the whole thing, it's just mind-boggling to me, in the sense that they wouldn't do it unless consumers were willing to do it. And thankfully, there's finally been some backlash. Yeah, and it's kind of intriguing also, if you go back to before, like the first couple of times the government has regulated gaming. Like, one of the first times was around 1910, when a bunch of back when pinball was more like a pachinko type game, where it was more of a game of chance than skill. So pinball was actually pretty much banned in the United States until like I want to say late 60s, because it had that mentality, or that it had that stripe to it that said it was a gambling game that was based entirely on chance. You're just throwing your money away for the chance that you might get more opportunities to play. Where the game then ultimately, pinball manufacturers and creators altered the game to be where it became a game of skill. So users, if they were good enough at the game, could play it as long as they wanted without having to risk like gambling essentially to play it more often. And
Mm.
so to me, Battlefront, once they entered, so I'm just going to transition back into Battlefront. So to me, for Battlefront to turn the game into a thing of where there are perks to unlock that ultimately change the dynamic and how you play and how you interact with the players and gives you an edge or gives them an edge over you, just doesn't make the game fun because there's not an equalization there that makes the game challenging to where you know you're beating someone on equal footing. Ultimately, they just have some type of modifier that makes their gunfire a little faster or something along those lines. And there were some other games. I'm just going to kind of keep transitioning into this. All Points Bulletin was a game that came out in, I want to say, 2010-ish.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like a Cops vs. Robbers GTA kind of game.
Mm.
And that game was completely ruined because they introduced this like market of modifiers you could put on your weapons. And it broke the game to where people could modify their SMG to fire so fast. There was nothing you could even do to counter that with any weapon you had because of just how many bullets they were firing. So it broke the game.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of things against that game. I was very excited for that game when it was announced. So
Yeah,
disappointed.
the studio going bankrupt a week after releasing it is another part of that one.
Jesus. So where do you potentially see the trajectory of like EA and this kind of thing? Like what is your estimate or your hypothesis for what's going to happen in the next coming months or year or so?
I'd have to look at how well Battlefront 2 is actually doing.
Mhm.
Because my favorite thing ever, like the public backlash to Battlefront was so outrageous that you had people like CNanners and big YouTubers who had sponsored videos from EA. Like they got sponsored to put the video up, and those videos were just getting like just hundreds of thousands of downvotes because from people just going, "Really, man, you sold out and you're posting this now?" And then a lot of other YouTube content creators waited till now to post their Battlefront 2 stuff. So it's just kind of funny in the sense that I think ultimately the internet has a short memory. They we despite the fact we get outraged by things pretty easily, and there's a very very fiery rhetoric for a while. We have short memories, so oftentimes we don't return to these subjects until later, and it's often very few people that even remember it in the long run. So I'd be curious to see if EA might address this slightly based on the amount of money they lost, and I hope they correct this behavior. But ultimately, it's consumers who are going to decide whether or not this behavior continues because they're going to be the ones paying for it. And if they keep paying for it, EA is going to keep doing it because they can keep milking that cow.
Mhm.
But
I
I
will
think
say though, Disney did wind up supposedly stepping in, and that's why they stopped the microtransactions at least until next year,
mhm,
which we're right around the corner. So who knows how soon or how late that may be? But
mhm.
yeah, I, I don't think they're going to be getting the rights to the next Star Wars Battlefront with the way things are going.
They probably will. EA has enough money they could buy off Disney, and Disney doesn't necessarily have the facilities to make their own games anymore because they laid off the entirety of LucasArts, who were the people that could have made the game before. But yeah, I'd be
Mhm.
curious to see what does happen. I doubt EA will lose the license. I think they're going to get a slap on the wrist, and I think they'll probably be back at making a new Battlefront 2 years from now anyway. But they may not mention the crates until later.
I'll be really disappointed if they go that route. I've personally I don't like announcing my boycotts because I don't think that's uh, I want people to be smart enough to make their own choices, but sometimes people aren't that smart.
Mhm,
I, I stop buying their games. If I want to play an EA game, I'll buy it used. I will give GameStop their money before I give EA their money. I'll go to a pawn shop and buy the game and play
mhm,
it. That money doesn't go to EA. That goes to the third party that is reselling the game.
mhm,
I won't buy any microtransactions. I will still maybe experience it. I'm not really I kind of don't even want to play the game just because of how much it is like just the route they've gone. Like I'm just highly disappointed because I felt like EA was it was and is or has great developers with them. Like I feel bad for Dice, the studio, because I'm sure they were strong armed by EA and the people who have money in EA. And I used to do game development, so I don't want to be hard on the developers. And I highly recommend people not go after the people like Dice and whatnot, because their
Well,
job.
they're just making a product per customer specifications. So EA came to them, want a game made like this. Can you make it? And they're like, yeah, we'll make it like that.
Yeah,
It's not like they're the ones responsible. It's like, but I think coming down on Dice, I think, is the wrong way to look at it. I think coming down on EA is the best way, because they're ultimately the ones making the decisions and how these things are ultimately implemented within the game.
absolutely. Yeah, get mad at the people who are calling the shots and doing these, not the people who are just creating the content. So a lot of people have jobs like so.
Yeah, I think like they made a good product. To me, unfortunately, it's a boring product that is incredibly limited, and there's not enough dynamics to the game that make me even want to play them. Just because, like, what made me kept coming back to Battlefield 1942, Battlefield 2, was how great you had the airfields you could launch from, and the capturing the points, and the way those games were very fluid, and they changed like every time. These ones, you don't have that same. None of the games, at least none of the Battlefront games I played, with the exception of the actual Battlefronts from the early 2000s, were that those games had a pretty good flow, and you had multiple vehicle types. Where these new ones, it's like the vehicles are a secondary afterthought, and they just control like garbage in every in every respect. So it's not like what?
No, I was saying that's disappointing. That's
I'm just like, I'm like, ultimately, like, I guess I don't buy EA games anymore just because they're disappointing and they're not worth the money you would spend to get it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, and I'm a PC gamer in terms of how I deal with EA now, because I don't have the most advanced consoles at the moment, because I just haven't bothered, because nothing captivates me. So I play PC high-end games. And Origin is the biggest piece of garbage that has ever existed, and pales so much in comparison to Steam as a platform. I don't want to deal with it. Like, my Origin account has been hacked 3 times, and it has nothing to do with what I'm doing with Origin, because I've made sure that password is stupid long, and I have it written down somewhere because I can't remember it because of how dumb long it is, and I don't use it anywhere else. But yet it keeps getting hacked because EA has really, really crappy security functions and designs on Origin. So I just don't bother with it. And that's another reason why I don't buy EA games, because they decided to have their own distribution platform for their just ultimately subpar games.
Yeah,
I'm being long-winded. I'm sorry.
I agree with it all. Like EA has just made a lot of bad choices, and I don't think enough people have stopped supporting them because they want that self-satisfaction or whatever it is. Like, EA games aren't that high quality, in my opinion. Like, the work that goes into it is great, but it seems intentionally limited because they're more focused on the numbers. And
yeah, I mean, like, they're pretty games, and you might have some fun in the long run or a short run. To me, like, there's no draw to keep coming back to it, because the games, to me, they don't feel innovative to me, and the gameplay overall seemed very limited, and just the shooting mechanics in the game I just thought they sucked. So I'm just like, at least for Battlefront.
I think this is the last point that I want to hit on. If you have anything else, feel free to shoot afterwards. But I think a perfect example was the Kojima Konami situation, where you have these people who are skilled and want to make these great games, but they are limited because of their publishers. And I think EA is kind of a similar situation, where I think you're going to see more and more people going either the indie route or going towards developers that are going to support them, rather than being just money hungry. Now, Sony, I'm not going to act like they're not money hungry, but they, in my opinion, they make pretty decent PlayStation games. I like the series. I don't think it was like super great, but I thought it was very different, very good storyline to me with certain things. A lot of people like the new Horizon Zero Dawn game. Nathan Drake, Uncharted. They make good quality games, and it seems like they give the developers free reign to do whatever they want, because they trust them and know that if they have free reign, they can make good stuff. It's common sense. If you look at leadership, if you look at like teamwork and mastery and stuff like that, when you have this room for creativity and people let you grow, then you're going to do better. But when you're focused on like, how can we make our numbers as high as possible, you can hit that goal, and you can get people to buy those things, but you're not going to have that same connection. You're not going to have that same quality of, man, this game was like the best game ever. You might win Game of the Year at the fucking VGAs, but that doesn't honestly mean anything to me or to any really like hardcore gamer that respects it.
Did Battlefront 2 win anything at the VGAs?
I don't know. I actually didn't watch.
Most controversial title should be an award.
I don't know if it even got nominated for anything. Like I think it might have kept it, to be honest with you. It might be in actors VGAs. But yeah, I my personal hope is that people that work with these companies leave and hopefully find a job that is also sustainable and allows them the freedom to create games, because I want more good games. And if we go this EA route, I don't think it's going to be anything good or anything fulfilling. It's going to be a game. It's going to be a game that you can play. But is that really what you want to spend your $60 on, or do you want to put a game where this person put their heart into the game? I think that gamers and parents specifically need to put more homework into what they're buying and not blame the developers for everything. But I also think it's important for developers to have the best intentions when they're trying to make these games and not just be money hungry and screw these people over. That's just my thought. I mean, obviously it is a business. If you have any closing thoughts, let me know what you think, Ian.
Yeah, it's kind of, unfortunately, with the big AAA titles, you have like almost like a movie studio system of producing games now, where they market test it in a sense that we're going to make a game like this. This many people pretty much say they'll buy it because they like that concept. So they're not making games from that creative perspective and like, hey, is this going to be a fun and innovative title for people to play? It's more, will people buy this title? So it's built along the same lines that Hollywood would build an action movie. Got to hit those generic markers, those points that attract people to the game, and then have that design in such a way that where they get more market return on what they're putting. So they're not making games based from a creative perspective. They're doing it more from a focus group kind of way, to where they want to make a game that appeals to the widest audience possible without risking alienating anyone. And I think ultimately, like, the AAA titles, I think, will suffer for that. It's like, especially Battlefront 2, where the single player campaign is laughably short and just kind of poorly written and dumb. It's not coming from that same perspective. It's going to a place where, like, will this appeal to the most people possible? And that's kind of like why, like, for me, I'm going to go to this way, because I've been replaying some David Cage games, and David Cage gets shit on a lot because people are like, oh, his video games aren't games, they're interactive stories. They're like, well, he never really said they weren't interactive stories. so I buy his games for a great, innovative, new idea and a story. That's kind of where I go to watch to play his games and his content. I know what I'm getting because that's, again, did my homework and I know who's making the game. But DICE and EA, they have this perspective that they want to make the most money possible out of these games with least amount of risk, because of multi-million-dollar budgets they have for these titles now.
Mm-hmm. There's a really good video by a YouTuber that you know of called the Nerd Writer. Nerd Writer 2 or something like that. But he made a video called talking about passable movies, where you have these blockbuster movies, basically the AAA studios of movies, and they make these movies that they sometimes get awards and stuff, but they're just passable if you really look at them and understand them from like how a good movie is actually made. If you're educated on that, it's passable. And it actually was very hard for me to digest, because some of the movies he used as examples, movies that I liked. So I had to like watch it and be like, I like this movie, and listening to what he's saying and really breaking it down. And finally, and this is the same issue I had with video games, where they were passable games, and I tried to like this game rather than being objective, and because I had paid money, I didn't want to hate this game, because I had paid money. I'll find a way to make myself like it. Which has helped me with being unbiased and finding the good in the bad. But you also have to acknowledge if the bad and if the quality of the game is poor. And I think a lot of people, myself included in that, at some point, try to make these games passable to, one, fulfill having fun or whatever, playing with friends, but two, because we invested in this and we don't want to feel like we've fooled ourselves. A lot of times you buy these games new, the best you're going to get for it is $30. You can't return a new game, so you kind of have to force yourself to like this game. I think a lot of that plays into it, and so many other factors. But yes, That's pretty much it for me. Is there anything else you want to add to it?
Yeah, just be aware of what you're getting into, and just I,
Mm.
I don't know. To me, it seemed to me like I don't understand how people kind of fell for it, because the last Battlefront game that came out to me was just really basic and didn't really innovate in terms of being a shooter or any of that. Like, yeah, it was Star Wars and that was fun for a minute, but I'm like, what do you really expect from Battlefront 2, where they just have subtle improvements to the prior game? But that's just me.
Yeah. Yeah, I will continue to follow the story as it develops. I think this isn't the last that we've heard from this or heard from Chris Lee. I think there's going to be some more things in the next few weeks and months, and I'm very very fascinated as to where this goes. I can't say that I'm excited, but I'm very very fascinated, and I will keep you guys updated. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. If you're for legislation, if you're not for it, why not? If you support EA and their decisions, let me know down below. Other than that, definitely make sure you guys hit that subscribe button so you can get updated as to when we upload new videos. Hit that like button, and also, Ian, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me at YouTube/Historic Nerd or www.historicnerd.com. Or if you want to talk to me directly, feel free to talk to me at historicalnerd on Twitter.com. But remember, if you don't like the game, just don't buy it.
Just say no.
Just
Just say
say
no.
no. Just say no. Just no.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I'll quote the Road Warrior. Just walk away. Just walk away.
If you're not fighting for something, or what is it? What is it? Sucker Punch. I know you probably hate that movie, but if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
You'll fall for nothing or whatever.
Yeah, you'll fall for anything. As always, I'm the Philosopher. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. YouTube.com/the Philosopher. I put videos on there, a lot of fighting game, philosophy related stuff. Of course, the consoleexplosion.com. Be sure you guys check that out. And as always, I will see you guys in the next one.
Bye.